Well, welcome officially to the Cresa Hybrid Workforce webinar, How to Affirm and Operationalize Your Strategy. As I have mentioned, I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa's Hybrid Workforce Services. I'm joined today by Steve Ike, Senior Vice President at Cresa, and Paul Springer, Senior Vice President at Cresa, will also be joining us later in the webinar. Welcome. So there's a workforce trend happening right now that's both frightening, but also exciting. It's frightening because it can cause real disruption for any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the broader economy, but also exciting because of the possibilities that it offers for organizations who really go on the offensive to capitalize on this trend. So I'm going to let some news headlines do the talking for us, and this frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a recent Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth. Employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. From Fortune magazine. Job hopping heats up. 65% of U.S. workers are looking for a new job. Personally, that number floored me that it was that high. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, with new opportunities and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. A chart from the U.S. Labor Department. Now, this shows the number of U.S. workers leaving their jobs as a percentage of total employment. And this ratio is called the quits rate, with quits being voluntary separations of people leaving their jobs. This is a really good barometer of worker confidence in the economy and their ability to get another job. So a few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph, which goes back to the year 2001, is in September of 2009, just coming out of the Great Recession. Of course, hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job, and the quits rate was 1.2%. Then the economy began to improve over time, and the number of people leaving their jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April of 2020. However, coming out of the pandemic 1 year later, in April of 2021, the quits rate skyrocketed, a whopping 80% to 2.8%, the highest level since at least 2000. Now in May, it decreased to 2.5%, still well above any time in the past 20 years. But then in June, which is the most recent month that we have numbers for, it jumped back up again to 2.7%. So what can be done about it? What are organizations doing to recruit and retain talent in the midst of this war for talent? Well, some are offering raises and bonuses. Some are extending perks, such as free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to design engaging office environments. Google is a great example. Google's building and repurposing its office spaces to make them more inviting, using cool outdoor hangouts called teepees for team meetings. This is just one example. They're trying to make the office place a place where you want to go, and candidly, where you're willing to make the commute. Finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they learned about remote work over the past year and a half or so, and combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Ford Motor Company is a good example. Ford has announced a progressive hybrid work model for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours approved by their managers. And you got to remember, that's coming not out of Silicon Valley, but that's coming from a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. And I think this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. She says, if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 12 months, it is that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. So the question most organizations are asking about this is, if a hybrid workforce strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest, then what should the balance be for my organization between remote and office? In other words, what's the right hybrid blend? And then once we've decided what that blend is, how do we put it into practice? Fairly, equitably, without opening up ourselves to any blind spots that we didn't think of in advance? Well, clearly, you need a plan. You need a plan to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department within an organization. Many businesses feel just like the person on this screen. There's so many paths to choose from, so many variables to consider, both known and unknown. Many organizations, they feel stuck and they're struggling to build consensus on a path forward. So, if you're interested in answering questions like, well, what is the right blend for our organization? And what are the criteria for a successful hybrid workforce strategy? What is the roadmap to navigate to the right blend of remote work in the office? And finally, how do we operationalize our strategy and put it into action? Then this is the webinar for you. As mentioned, I'm Jason Jones. I'm joined today by my colleagues Steve Ike and Paul Springer will be joining us shortly. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now exclusively leading two of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services. Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, just to name a few. Today we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end, and we'll record the webinar and send out a copy afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Just hover over the icons at the bottom and select the Q&A feature. And enter a question or a comment at any time throughout the organization, throughout the webinar. Please don't wait until just the very end. We want you to be able to participate as you're going along and provide commentary as well as questions as you think about them. And we'll be sure to get to everything at the end of the webinar. So today, we're going to address, number one, context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective, the benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy, its key elements, and a roadmap to affirm and operationalize your hybrid workforce strategy. So we start with context for the timeline of the pandemic. Phase one was the immediate phase. Overnight, most people were forced to work from home. Phase two is the endure phase. We continue to endure this experience, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and working to maintain our culture. Phase three will be the post-COVID phase. This is the sustain and compete phase. Organizations will strive to sustain a new way of working that leverages both what they learned about remote work while recapturing all of the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase two to phase three, we have to go through a transition. And that's where we are right now. But before leaders can move forward with a specific transition plan, they have to ask a key question. This is a question that addresses the powerful workforce desire that has been uncovered. This desire for freedom to choose where and when employees work. And this key question is one that we suggest you too ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will, number one, be reflective of our culture, but also both minimize expenses and the threat to business continuity, while also maximizing productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results. So it's these key business drivers that inform the planning process for a hybrid strategy and its implementation. But in order to evaluate different strategies, we have to start by understanding the benefits and the challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. Now, I want to pause for just a moment and make a quick point about bias. It may seem elementary to review the benefits and challenges because most of these we all already know. However, it's important when you begin your planning process to collectively agree as a team and state out loud what the benefits are of both options, remote work and the shared office. And the reason that this is important is because each person brings their own bias to the planning process. For example, introverts love working at home. Extroverts love the office and being around people. There's a tendency for each person to lift up the positives and downplay the negatives of the choice that they like best. So to foster objectivity and ensure your organization remains open-minded so that it can capture the benefits of both strategies into a hybrid strategy, start your planning process with a dialogue on the benefits and challenges of both. So, the top of the list for the benefits of remote working is the reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are the reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal costs of reduced commute, clothes, and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state that their work-life balance is better. On the other hand, the benefits of the office are time-proven and have really crystallized during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. Now, one benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. Multiple surveys show that at least 70% of employees want a hybrid workforce experience. That's a combination of both. Therefore, organizations are going to have to offer some degree of flexibility between the home and the office to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. However, even with all the benefits of a hybrid workforce environment, there are several challenges to plan for. And what we're going to do is walk through 3 scenarios that organizations will likely be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A. Team A has a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She's on board with the concept of giving you freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B has a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He is uncomfortable managing people that he cannot see and requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what's the outcome? Team B feels jealous and dispirited. They wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Now, another challenge is internal division within a hybrid team. And in this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time or majority in the office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time or majority remote. If the boss spends most of her time in the office, then the in-office team members have proximity to her, the remote members don't. And this proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. What's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced. And they may wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, Should I leave this organization and find one that is better structured or better suited to supporting my success in the way that it is that I really want to work? And finally, another challenge of a hybrid workforce regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when employees choose to work. For example, profile number one are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number two are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they take an afternoon or a day to work remotely, no big deal. And then profile number three's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person team meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office to work or just to socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles? What are the critical requirements of each department in your organization to support them all? Now, this next slide is really key to understanding the awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. What should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles at the same time? Should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any surprise why many organizations feel stuck in their planning? So those were 3 challenging scenarios, but here are some of the top challenges, specific challenges, that result from those scenarios. And you'll see the list developing on the screen. These looming issues showcase the need for organizations to invest time right now, preparing for the future, building consensus among leaders, casting a vision to employees, and ultimately creating a strategy, a coherent strategy that not only addresses these challenges, but also leverages the benefits of hybrid working to maximize productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and financial results. It's like I mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar. There's an opportunity to go on the offensive to take advantage of this new way of working, this potential new way of working. So to do that, Cresa has developed frameworks and practical roadmaps to tie all of the components of hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy and then operationalize the strategy. The first key framework is a concept called be sequential to be successful. And this gets you headed down the right path, and it all starts at the top. We believe the 2 most important elements of success are leadership and culture. They're the umbrella which overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and maximizing financial results informs all decisions and drives behavior. But to support these business goals, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, followed by workplace strategy, and then real estate strategy. Too often, companies skip the human component of the workforce strategy and go straight to step 2 or step 3. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. Be sequential to be successful. When workforce strategy is addressed first, it gives the organization freedom to design their workplace with the confidence that they're basing the design, the real estate strategy on meaningful information. You want to build your workplace design and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. The process is best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to determine and affirm the strategy. And phase 2 is to operationalize the strategy. Step 1, determine and affirm. It's easy to say, but it's much harder to do. Even those of you who have already determined your strategy may feel compelled to reassess key building blocks of your strategy in light of what it is that you learned today. So at a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote fully office, or a hybrid blend of the two. But this is also a decision around whether this is an organization-wide mandate, or will the choice of the strategy be narrowed down and left to the discretion of departmental and team leaders? Ultimately, who's making the decision for the organization at either a macro level or sort of boots on the ground at the micro level? Now, once you've made these decisions, you can move on to phase two, to operationalize the strategy. But this first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk you through a roadmap for making this decision in a manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key departments of your organization. So those key departments are listed here. It's examples: human resources, information technology, finance, etc. Each of them will make unique contributions to the collective success of the strategy. So in order to implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that each department is aligned with the others to create the integrated organizational structure that supports the strategy. And part of your due diligence is to uncover, well, what are the gaps for each department? And of course, how can those gaps be filled? And by the way, this is what top talent is looking for. When they consider joining your organization or contemplating whether or not they should stay in your organization, they want to know, number one, what is your strategy and what are the guidelines? And then number two, they want assurance that the organizational structure is in place to support the whole strategy, but also their individual success based on how they're going to be working and how they want to work. So this slide shows all of these critical requirements of each department necessary to support the strategy. This is the checklist that every organization should work through when affirming their hybrid workforce strategy. At Cresa, we help our clients evaluate all of these requirements in a thoughtful, methodical manner because we believe this is we believe this is a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know of anyone else who starts their real estate strategy by evaluating the critical requirements of an upstream workforce strategy. Now, we'll send an email with this list out to all attendees, so no need to jot down every bullet point right now. And we're going to go through some of the detail for a few of these departments during the webinar. But if you'd like to have a deeper conversation about your specific situation, please contact us or the Cresa advisor who invited you to this webinar. So one of the most critical departments of a successful hybrid workforce strategy is human resources. Just a few of the critical requirements for HR to effectively support hybrid work start with job roles. You have to determine which job roles are appropriate for hybrid work and which job functions might be modified to facilitate virtual processes and virtual collaboration. Next, you have to determine, well, who has the personal aptitude for hybrid work? Because not everyone who's in a job suitable for remote or hybrid work is also a good fit for hybrid work. Personal assessments can help, especially when they're coupled with training, which leads to training for managers and employees. Managers will benefit from training to better manage a team that at any given time includes some people at home and some people at work at the same time. They're not accustomed yet to managing those diverse yet simultaneous communication streams. In addition, this is really interesting and really important. The technology that enables hybrid work is constantly changing. And many employees, they're just not that familiar with the ins and outs of the technology that they already have. Collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, and Zoom are some examples. And then there's document management tools that are underutilized. This is like Box, Dropbox, etc. Next is eligibility. Eligibility requirements set expectations and they provide structure. Companies can use key performance indicators and performance evaluations to establish and maintain eligibility for whatever that hybrid model is, the amount of time that they spend working at home versus in the office. And lastly, a key component to your workforce strategy, frankly, is something that seems mundane, but it's the employee handbook. Many businesses only focus on updating the hybrid work policies and procedures section, when they're looking at these strategies. But when you have a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook requires a detailed review to ensure that the policies align with both the remote and in-office personnel. And speaking of hybrid workforce policies, these policies should address eligibility requirements, the tools and resources the company will provide for home use, what the employee is expected to provide, basic standards for internet, quiet place to work, etc., and expectations for personal performance and participation, and finally, what constitutes disqualification. You see, a clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they will likely be different than yours. Now, for a deeper dive into technology and how it supports the hybrid workforce strategy, I want to introduce my colleague, Steve Ike. Like I mentioned, Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy and consulting to several large, successful global businesses. Steve, I hand it over to you.
Jason, and thank you for that. And as we take a look into the technology stack and how it's used, I think it's best to kind of set the expectation that technology is more than platforms and tools. It's really a resource, an enabler that can be leveraged to create that connected and collaborative enterprise. As we look at when, where, and how people work, whether remote or in the office, or a combination of that, communication and collaboration platforms are the foundation for purposeful interaction. Through real-time and near real-time communications, these platforms can be used for anytime, anywhere, one number reach across, and using multiple devices, your tablets, your cell phones, your laptops, and other mobile devices for that. And when combined with a shared workplace where you can meet, collaborate, and share ideas, drives the productivity element of a distributed workforce. And performance management really focuses on managing productivity rather than activity, and focuses on 3 areas for that hybrid strategy: building trust, empowering employees, and driving productivity. And as we look at that, it helps make that change from, in the past, hey, if I can't see, I can't manage, into if I can measure, I can manage. So performance management is both a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and evaluate both corporate performance and employee performance. And by having the visualization of that, this helps managers have meaningful conversations with their employees and provides real-time access to that corporate information in a visual dashboard. In turn, this helps address something that Jason mentioned earlier, is that tension of the remote versus in-office. And it provides something that Paul often talks about, is this consistency, where we can measure productivity, progress towards goals, and driving business outcomes. And next, as we move into document management, Jason mentioned Box, Dropbox, and Google Drive. But this is an online and library that uses those tools combined with a management tool that can be used to manage content, address security, who's the owner, what version is it, and then deal with the distribution and workflows of those documents and files. So as we think about this, it can facilitate real-time and anytime access, addressing process, workflows, and document controls. And think of it in these areas: in a loan processing environment for a financial services company, claims management for insurance, financial, HR, marketing, and operations records for general business. And finally, as we get into cybersecurity and compliance, it does address the policy and compliance, but often it's the most overlooked and underanalyzed area for remote work. With more people at home, with more connected devices, it gives that chance for unauthorized access into critical and secure corporate information. So first, there are some technical considerations. We want to look at a separate wireless network for the home users. We want to deal with secure connectivity between a mobile phone, a tablet, or laptop. We want to be able to measure intrusion detection, and there's so many different ways that are coming in. We want to also get into the physical and logistics of the remote workspace. Sometimes, not often, but if you have the ability to have a locked door, we want to be able to have that that's set up for the information. We want to be able to provide for laptop security and securing that laptop when you're not working. And then getting into the other human factors of if you're in an environment where you have multiple people working from home or students and family members that are engaged in educational activities, if you're dealing with secure information, what are the policies so that we can protect what's being said or spoken and what's being visible on the laptop so that you have those. And a key point, where possible, is to keep your work area separate from your personal activities area. And finally, as we get into closing out the cybersecurity, there are training elements that focus on employee responsibility. That's probably the biggest piece of protecting information. So we want to make sure that you include an IT security policy that addresses everything from bring your own device to web activity and opening of emails and attachments on emails when you're in that corporate environment. So it separates that work activity from the personal activity and protects the corporate information. So Jason, thank you for that, and I'm sure that there will be questions at the end that come up related to this.
Okay, great, thank you. And as we can see, Paul Springer has joined us. We're glad to have him here. Thanks for joining us, Paul. We'll get some questions to you here at the end. Thank you for that, Steve. So one more key component or another department that's going to be very important for an integrated hybrid workforce strategy and tying together all of the organizational structure is the real estate that supports the people. And this is the physical space that employees occupy. But the concept of office space, it's really changed dramatically because of the pandemic. And to accommodate employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations must view the workplace as a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places, not just one place. Employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel they'll be most productive for that day, or even just part of the day, which means it's freedom of movement that is so important, whether between workplaces or actually even inside of a workplace. Now, at the same time, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and the medium of collaboration, whether that medium is virtual or in person. Team leaders must be intentional about when to use the medium of digital tools, such as video conferences and collaboration software like Slack and Microsoft Teams, versus when they use the medium of the physical office for in-person collaboration. They've got to be intentional about how they use these tools, ensuring that people who are working remotely on any given day are actively included in these in-person meetings that are occurring at the office, and that they're not at a disadvantage to those people who are in the office. Leaders will need to model the behavior they want to see from their employees. And they'll need to make efforts to be organized, prepared, and intentional about how to make the best use of everyone's time, how to be equitable and inclusive, and ultimately how to build a culture of purposeful collaboration. In order to make it easy to visualize these steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, Cresa has developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of the process. This is a core part of our workforce strategy consulting, which starts with phase one, which is step one, affirm the strategy. This is to clearly state, as a reminder, this is clearly stating whether your organization is fully remote, fully office, or some degree of a hybrid blend. And as importantly, it's to state whether or not this is one size fits all, an organization-wide mandate, or to what degree the decision will be delegated to departmental and team leaders. We always begin with a vision and goals session, and that's where you build the project team, establish goals, and set a timeline. Next on the roadmap, you go through the process of discovery, conducting interviews, surveys, and focus sessions to gather information about critical requirements of each department. Then you'll analyze by developing strategy, ensuring departmental alignment, and determine appropriate solutions. This phase ends with internal affirmation of your strategy. Phase 2 is the subject of the rest of the webinar, and it encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the strategy that you've chosen. So let's talk about the beginning of phase 2, which is the criteria and guidelines. As mentioned, this is where you determine criteria and guidelines. But we also mean specifics around when people will be working in the office versus remote. And examples include X number of days of the week in the office, or instead perhaps X% of time in the office, which provides a little more flexibility. And there may be variations for specific employees based on their job description or travel requirements, as opposed to a blanket policy. We also recommend in this phase that you consider categorizing each employee to help communicate the plan throughout your workforce in a way that's transparent and to ensure equity. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. That's step 3. This not only means putting the plan in writing, but it also means documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions and contracts, and of course, creating the dynamic schedules that you're going to need, which will detail when and where employees are working as a schedule any particular day or any particular week. After clear documentation, you'll need to prepare a very clear communication and change management plan. So in this, it's critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on your culture and on the operations. So preparing a 12-month communication playbook is going to put you in position to manage the change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles you'll utilize, such as Slack, newsletters, will be town halls, etc., and even a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging that anticipates each milestone and possible reactions. This is what's going to help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months. Finally, with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. You should review your strategy every 3 months after the initial rollout in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas, remain nimble. And in fact, all this planning and road mapping and team building, et cetera, it really puts you in position to remain nimble as situations change over time. And a great way to do that is solicit feedback along the way, and then take the initiative to make sure that the changes that you are making are achieving the fundamental business goals of productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and financial results. So, do you remember at the beginning of the webinar when I broached the subject of benefits and challenges of working in the office versus working remotely? And I pointed out that everyone comes to the table with an inherent bias for either one or the other. Well, this bias can really sway the outcome of your planning. So you want to do what you can to minimize it. And what Cresa offers, in addition to our experience, is being a resource that helps our clients bridge the gap between differing opinions in the organization. We help ensure that a potentially subjective process remains an objective process in order to arrive at the best strategy for the organization as a whole. So in doing that, Cresa offers 3 tiers of support in navigating the hybrid workforce roadmap. Tier 1 is focused on operationalizing a strategy that's already been decided by the client. So we'll review previous discovery activities and use that information to align all of the departments and operationalize the strategy. Tier 2 spends more time helping our client with the discovery in the collaboration with key leaders of the organization. We conduct stakeholder interviews, focus sessions, and surveys, and then we use that information to operationalize the strategy. Tier 3 is similar to Tier 2, but takes an even deeper dive across more of the organization during the discovery process. And of course, we modify these tier levels collaboratively with our clients. Sample deliverables from our engagements include an executive summary, updated hybrid workforce policies, sample work agreements, a 12-month communication plan, sample job descriptions, a decision matrix to help teams finalize what their strategy will be, and sample employee letters, perhaps thanking them for participating in company surveys and also announcing what the strategy will be. So with that, let me offer a summary. The desire for freedom in where and when employees work is changing where and when we work. And as important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy unique to them, their culture, and their business needs. And to get there, transition is key. How you transition to your new hybrid work environment will determine how competitive you will be to attract and retain talent and to compete with other organizations in the marketplace. But as you go through this, in order to do it properly and most effectively, you should be sequential to be successful. And this is really important. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize a strategy, be sure that your organizational structure can support it, all of the departments, all those critical requirements. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all the departments in your organization to ensure alignment and preparedness. Then follow through on all the steps for implementation. That way, you'll be in a better position to evaluate ongoing feedback and make continuous improvements so you can evolve effectively. Now, there's one last thought that we want to leave you with before we go into some Q&A. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off of aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. Similarly, implementing corporate programs that involve significant change requires the same 3 elements. But planning and training, they don't happen without leadership. This is a time in history that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So, be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. So, thank you for joining us today on the webinar. As you can see on the screen, we've got contact information for myself, for Steve, and for Paul. And now what we're going to do is turn to our Q&A so that we can go through some questions. Let me stop share and move over to open up that that part of the webinar. And the first question that I see on here is, I think this is a good one for Paul, which is about gotchas that we may not be thinking of. It says, what are some gotchas or things we may not be thinking of, and what can we do to avoid them? Paul, by the way, welcome to the webinar.
Great. Thank you. I apologize, everyone, for being late. But as far as gotchas, they're really not gotchas as much as they're really just thinking about the regular HR and operations through a different lens. And so when you're thinking about hybrid workforce strategies, really what you need to keep in mind is that you're working with a dispersed team that could be anywhere in the country or really anywhere in the world. So you need to make sure that your business operations are aligned with that type of a structure. That might mean things like making sure your payroll is set up in that way, making sure that benefits and health and welfare programs are available for people in all locations where you have people, or maybe even proactively getting yourself set up in all states within the country, so you're ready to go and proactively prepared, kind of aligned with some of the things Jason was talking about before. And then, you know, things like we were talking about, like job descriptions, like employment contracts, like offer letters, different things. You need to make sure that you're thinking in that more holistic way, because what feels like gotchas really is just thinking about your operations in a more dispersed manner.
Yeah, well, it makes person basically it's to avoid a gotcha is to be prepared and go through a planning process.
Right.
I know from my time in the Navy, unforeseen events would pop up as we were perhaps on a multi-plane airstrike, but the higher the quality of our planning, the better we were able to adjust to these unforeseen events. And I think the same holds true here. Next question is, I think this is good for Steve, because this is around performance management and KPIs and things. What are some examples of tools that help measure time, productivity, and engagement of hybrid employees?
Great question. So earlier we spoke about performance management both being a tool and a process. So as we look first, we have data points and we can gather empirical data and feedback from a variety of systems, whether it be the HRIS system, whether it be your CRM system or your ERP system, or even manually tabulated data. And what we want to be able to do is compile that, and we call them contributors that feed into a system. So names of system, you know, your HRIS systems from ADP or others have tools. Tableau is a great tool that combines in fact, is the Microsoft suite as well. What we want to be able to do is first identify what are the key items we want to measure, both individually and organizationally, that there are data points that you can measure. Second, we want to compile them and have thresholds individually and corporately that are met. And the most important is that it be converted into a visual tool, whether I want to be able to see it on my phone, on a tablet, or in a daily and weekly report. And then monthly and quarterly, as managers are meeting with their individual team members and their teams as a whole, we want to be able to share that data and provide access in so that I can see what is my contribution towards team goal, what is my team's contribution towards organizational goals, and break it down within operations, sales and marketing, finance. So you want to see the important data that's there for you. So that's the nice thing with Tableau and Microsoft and the other HRIS systems that are there, is you can create user-based profiles and user-based dashboards that come up and are there for that. So great question.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Steve, you and I had a discussion around this just the other day around, you know, there's some jobs that are easy to measure certain key performance indicators, right? If it's a number of calls taken, the amount of time spent on the phone, solving a problem, et cetera. But then there's other jobs where it's a lot harder. And you were talking about team goals, organizational goals. Maybe that would help to address this just a little bit further.
So perfect question. So yeah, you're right. Exactly. In customer service and client-facing roles, whether it be a sales role or other, there are completed activities and completed work items.
Right.
But other organizations, going back to the loan processing, or we have a lot of back office work items that are there. If there are empirical measurements that can be taken, you think about it, we're gathering data on multiple sources.
Yeah.
But in the back office environment, or in areas where you have multiple team members working on the same items, we want to measure those things that are organizational. So let's take an example of a loan processing organization. And we know within each functional step in that workflow or their process, there are input items that are coming into the workflow, and then there are completed items. And typically, if we can measure those on the entry side and the completion side, we can then measure them back in.
I see. Yeah. So that's the key, is trying to find what it is that you get as an organization. Let's decide what we're going to measure and then see how the team does towards accomplishing those goals.
And it has to be very meaningful data for that as well. You know, we don't want to overanalyze or overmeasure, but what are those key performance indicators that are there? And do we have data points that can be measured for that individually and organizationally?
Very well. Very well. So this is another interesting question. This is Paul, this is good for you. How do we create a hybrid workforce policy that meets the needs of both, I think that's the key word here, both employees and the company? And we see this quite a bit in our consulting, right? It's where there's some friction set up between management and labor, so to speak, or employees and their leaders. So how do you do that? How do you create, this is good. How do you create a policy that meets the needs of both?
So, essentially it sounds easy, but it's really not that easy. To gain that type of consensus you're talking about, you have to actually talk to both of those groups. You need to talk to the employees. It can either be through, like we do in our consulting, through a survey or focus groups or something like that, or just other means of collecting feedback from the employees. And then you need to spend some time really understanding the future direction of the organization from a leadership perspective, talking to the leadership, understand the long-term strategy for the business overall, not necessarily just related to hybrid, but the future direction of the business overall. And then you fold the hybrid strategy into that. And so once you understand what the future direction of the organization is and you align the employee feedback with that, then you have the ability to combine those two, gain some consensus. You're not going to make every employee happy with every single point, but if you can really get a good understanding of what everyone's needs are and incorporate as much of that into the future long-term solution, then you'll make as many people happy. Most people will be aligned with the strategy and will be cheerleaders for future changes. And as you're looking at those future changes, you want to make sure that you're following the same process. You're collecting feedback from employees, you're bringing the employees along for the journey, and not as leadership coming in and saying, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. You want to make sure that everyone's part of that long-term solution.
Right. That's good. Another question is, I'll take this very simple. Who is typically included in the workshop you offer? And I believe this is a question around, as we form a team, the company forms a team to go through the process, who's included? And what we always recommend is these should be very senior leaders in the organization, and you want good representation across the organization with a couple of key areas. You absolutely want someone from human resources, which seems obvious, but we'll say it out loud. Human resources is critical. Information technology is also critical. We recommend the CIO or the CTO, as the case may be. And then from there, someone in operations. It's good to have someone from finance. And then it's sort of just a choice of the organization as to who makes the most sense from maybe who has the lion's share of employees or special requirements for their employees that they really need their voice to be heard as part of this planning process. Anyone else have any thoughts on that about who should be involved in the in this type of engagement?
One thing that I'll add is, I agree with everything that you said, Jason, but you want to make sure that that group includes all the right stakeholders in order to kind of align with the question that I was asked before, all the right stakeholders to really make sure that you're focused on all the needs of the organization. You don't want just the operational leaders. You don't want just, the CEO. You want a good sampling of the leadership that incorporates all the different aspects, the programmatic, the operational, the executive leadership, so you can make sure that all of those voices are heard.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. That's good. We've got 2 minutes here. Steve, this is a good question for you, sort of a practical question around technology and furniture, et cetera. Do you have insights into what companies are doing for furniture and technology in the home office?
Great question. And it really, now that we are 12 months plus into this cycle of remote work, a lot of individuals have gone and gotten their own setup. Let's take a look at 2 areas for that. First is the upfront cost of setting up a home office, virtual office. We want to start with recommendations for a good desk, multiple monitors at eye level. We want to have good ergonomic chairs. Paul spoke about employee wellness. And if we are a desk-bound job, we want to make sure that the workspace is comfortable and applies to the type of work being done. So we've got some upfront costs. And I'm going to answer a little bit more on that into what companies are doing.
Yeah,
So
I think that's probably the most important is our company's offering a stipend, upfront allowance, or how much, and then we got to go because we're out of time.
We're at that time, so I'm watching the 3 o'clock hour. So typically upfront costs for the desks, the chairs, the monitors, you want to supply an allowance for the employees to use. And that typically can range from $250 to $750 for that. And even more the ongoing monthly expenses to cover the internet access and the upgraded wireless access points in the house so that you can separate a network. And we see companies providing in between $50 and $100 if they're also including an allowance for the mobile device, mobile phones or tablets.
Yeah, and then there's the furniture and the desks is on top of that. So it depends on the budget and how big the company is, but we've seen everything from $1,000, $1,500 to help set up their employees. So, well, look, a copy of this webinar will be sent to you, emailed to you, and please share that with others in your organization as appropriate. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please reach out with questions. We'd love to have conversations. We talk to companies all the time about what we're seeing in the market, and love to provide context as well as some insights, and that's free. We're happy to have a conversation with you. So for myself, Jason Jones, and for Paul Springer and Steve Ike, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And we look forward to hearing from you all. Take care.
Thank you.